Okay. Alrighty. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone back. Today, we're going to discuss the consequences, if you will, the consequences of the Tzimtzum. Before I begin, I would like to thank Sam Liebens for his words of support and his initiative, and I'd like to thank everyone who's donated to the Har'el Beit Midrash over the last 12 hours. We started the Har'el Beit Midrash with a mission of educating the educators and influencing the influencers, and these shiurim are part of that goal, are pursuant to that goal, and we want to open people up to thinking about issues that they've thought about before, but to think about them in different ways. And every donation is appreciated. When we go to the large donors and they see that their small donations come in, and it shows them that there's popular support, and it really makes a difference. So every donation is really very much appreciated. So thank you very much to all those who made their donation over the last 12 hours. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much again. Okay, so last time we discussed the Tzimtzum, and we saw that there was a dispute in how to understand the meaning of the Tzimtzum. There were those that understood that the Tzimtzum, that God's limiting of himself in order to make space for the world, in order to make space for another, is what they call Tzimtzum kipshuto, that there's a certain amount of literary truth to the Tzimtzum, that there is, in fact, a space in the cosmos in which God is absent. This is a dualistic view. The Balatanya came out very much against this view. He said the Tzimtzum was shelo kipshuto, that it is not to be taken literally. And then we come to this issue, if it's not to be taken literally, so then what does it mean? We come to this issue of different perspectives, that from God's perspective, there was no Tzimtzum, but from the human perspective, there is a Tzimtzum. So this is what I want to explore today, and we're going to see a famous parable that the Baal Shem Tov used to tell. We're going to study that together, and then we'll see some other sources. Among those sources, we'll see another little piece from the Balatanya, and something hopefully we'll get to the Mea Shiloach that elucidate this point. So we talk about Tzimtzum, and we talk about the Tzimtzum not being kipshuto, not to be understood literally. So then what does that mean? So that's the question that I'm asking. But now let's step back and just study together this piece from the Baal Shem Tov. This story is quoted in a number of different places by various Talmidim and grandchildren. So it's pretty clear that he actually said this story. Okay, so let's start. He says, this is from his grandson. Okay, Shamati mashal me Adoni aviz keni zecher l'chaya olam haba. The mashal is as follows. Mashal lemelech she'asa mechitzot rabim be'achizat einayim zo lifnim mizo. Ba'achizat einayim. That's a very, very important term. As a sleight of hand, it's almost in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, achizat einayim is what a conjurer does. Sleight of hand with something, when he does something which appears to be real magic, but it's not. It's just an illusion. So here we have, there's a mashal, lemelech, she'asa mechitzot rabim ba'achizat einayim, zo lifnim mizo. Many barriers. He created a palace, and there were barriers to get to it. We'll see. V'gam sivei ben kotel lekotel naharot, v'gam chayalot rabim mevuhalim, right? Army, armed guards, and moats around the palace. V'gam dubim ba'arayot, right? Lions and tigers and bears. V'shar chayot mevuhalim, b'chdei sheyiru migeshet elav. In order, what was the purpose of creating all these barriers? In order that people should fear coming close. V'lo kol harotzeli tolet Hashem yavo v'yitol. So that not everyone who wants to come close to God should come. Who come close to the king, rather, should come. V'hamelech hu nora u'malchuto b'kol mashal. And the king is really awesome. Okay? V'or pnei hamelech meir b'chol ha'olamot u'kvodo malei kol ha'aretz. His light reaches all the corners of the earth. Rak hakotalim v'asovavim heim hamastirim et pnei hamelech. But there's something which conceals the face of the king. V'hu b'achizat einayim. And this power which conceals the countenance of the king is created by sleight of hand. I'm being very careful how I'm translating this, okay? Ukruzim yotzim kol mi sheyavo el hamelech yitein lo hamelech osher v'chavod v'yesaretz lo omed b'heichalo. Right? Promises of riches to he who approaches the king. Umi she'eino rotzeh bazeh. But someone who doesn't desire that, rak yisheba lechoma rishona, when he comes to the first obstacle, the first wall, v'roeh kama or kaga govhan, they see how wide it is and how high it is, and all the other frightening things connected with the obstacles, with the lions and the tigers and the bears. So his heart retreats. But there are those who have a little more courage. There are those that overcome some of the obstacles. So there's another temptation. Rather than the fear of the lions and the tigers and the bears, now there's mamon rav, there's riches. Lavo lefnim min hachomot. V'lefamim acharei ra'o sheyesh lo kol hon yakar v'kabir matzah yado v'tzorot mamon. Nasog achor. And then there are people who stop there, that they're happy with the riches that they've achieved, and they go no further. Even though they see that they were able, you could say that there should have been positive reinforcement in the successes of overcoming some of the barriers. Despite that, and they also see, this is an interesting point, ve'ein sham pegara ve'ein mayim ve'ein choma. So they realize that the obstacles were not as serious, or maybe not real at all, after they were overcome. So there's a game of perspective here. Looking forward, prospectively, there are obstacles, but after the obstacles are overcome, they seem to have evaporated. And despite the fact that the people that have overcome some of the obstacles, and despite the fact that they see that those obstacles retrospectively are not real, mikol makom, but nonetheless, achar asher kol choma b'choma gavoa v'rechava me'arishona v'ayuma kedei lavhil yoter shelo yikrav nisher yirtzel hamelech. Right, but despite the fact there's a reality of the obstacles that they haven't overcome yet, those still seem very real, and they cower in front of those obstacles and they retreat. So this is very interesting. The obstacles are created be'achizat einayim. Be'achizat einayim. They are somewhat, I'm being very careful here in how I formulate this, because I want to clarify this later. They are somewhat illusory. People within this illusory existence, this illusory topography, they experience the fact, this is like a dream within a dream. Sometimes, like when you're dreaming And if it gets scary, in your dream you say, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, I'm the only one that dreams like this, but I think it's pretty universal. I hope so. That you say to yourself, oh, I'm really lucky, this is only a dream. So these people, like within a dream, they see that the obstacles are dreamlike, but nonetheless they're still afraid of the obstacles to come. Right? So the fear, it's really what Roosevelt said, right? We have nothing to fear but fear itself, because really, ein sham pegara, ve'ein mayim, ve'ein choma. There's no lions and tigers and bears, and there's no moat, and there's no obstacle. Mikol makom, but the ones that are still to come are still frightening, and they retreat. Okay? Aval, leben hamelech, right, for the son of the king, so he desires the king, and he's going to overcome the obstacles. Okay, I'm skipping down a little bit. And when he comes, I'm skipping down a few lines, you can see, when he comes and he sees even more obstacles, okay, when he sees even more obstacles, I'm scrolling down here, just, okay, so we can see it. When he sees there are even more obstacles, Tamal atzmo lema'od, he was amazed, right? He's amazed. And he says, Ma ze hamelech rachman k'motcha k'rachim aval banim tastir atzmacha be'esterot k'elu. It doesn't make sense. Right? Va'ani ana ani ba. And how can I get past these? This is terrible. Yeah? So tama al atzmo ma'od, right? He's amazed. And he says, how do I get out of this? Vitzoek. And he cries out, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. My Lord, my God, why have you deserted me? Ubekoach livavo hanishbar vehaboer lavo el aviv moser atzmo v'dochek atzmo b'kocho, right, with all his might and his desire to see his father's face, and he actually manages l'daleg al hachamot v'naharot, right, and he manages to overcome all the obstacles. Umifazer kol hono l'chayalot hasovavim shama, and he bribes all the guards, right? Ubirot aviv ga'guav v'msuit nafsho, and his father sees how much he desires to see him and all his self-sacrifice. V'shavotav ala bo'oznei hamelech, and his prayers go up to the ears of the king. Heisir ha'achizat einayim halalu vayar ki ein sham choma v'lo shum masach mavdil. Okay? So he sees now, when he reaches the king, he sees that there's really no obstacles. He looks back, and what does he see? Rak eretz mishor v'ganotu pardesim. No mechitzot, no obstacles, no lions, no tigers, no bears, no moats, no alligators, just a simple plain with gardens, etc. Okay, the hakli, right? So this is what he sees when he looks back. So he wants to get to the king, to his father, and how does he get there? This is an interesting point. How does he get there? He gets there, there's a process. It starts with tama al atzmo ma'od. There's a sense of amazement that this can't be, right? And he cries out. He's so'ek. And then his heart is broken, right? And then he's moser atzmo. There's self-sacrifice here. Okay? Misirut nafsho. Okay? How does the person overcome the illusion of the barriers? They overcome the illusion of the barriers not through what we might expect. Right? We say, well, how do you overcome the illusion of the barriers? Someone might say, okay, Torah mitzvot. You overcome the barriers by, you could have tefillah, but you have tefillah, limud Torah, and fulfilling the Torah mitzvot. He doesn't say that. In the mashal, at least, but in the mashal, in the nimshal as well, the way it's overcome is through an interior transformation, which begins with a sense of amazement when he meets the outside, when he sees this, when he sees these barriers, when he is willing to sacrifice himself ultimately to overcome the barriers, then he gets a different picture of the reality, and that is that there are in fact no real barriers. Okay? There's an interesting reference here. He says, when he speaks to the king, he says, "Ukimat asher avadati, vayomer hamelech kum b'ni chavivi." And the king says to him, "Get up, my dear son." Vayoshet lo sharbit hazahav asher biyado, vayichazkeu vayalbishehu hodo va'oro v'levusho, etc. The Vayoshet lo Shabit HaZahav is a reference, of course, to Megillat Esther. And that's very interesting to reference Megillat Esther, even in this oblique way, in this context, because it's telling us that the reality in the Megillah is also a hidden reality, right? We're actually not so far from Purim, so you can remember this if you want to be Doresh for Purim here, that the reality of the Melech and the Sarim is one which is not real. The true reality is what's going on behind the scenes, right? Achashverosh isn't really the all-wise and all-powerful king, right? The real king is God, etc. So there's a reference here to Megillat Esther, because this is really the theme of Megillat Esther, that there's illusion and there's reality. Okay? And what the Baal Shem Tov is saying here is that the Tzimtzum, right, in other words, right, he's saying that the Tzimtzum is lo kipshuta, right? The Tzimtzum is that there's a place where there's no God. Again, a dualistic view where we really look into the darkness and there's darkness. Okay? Whereas what the Baal Shem Tov is saying is that this darkness that we sense is not real. It is created by God, quote unquote, as achizat einayim, as an illusion, right? In order that only those worthy should be able to attain some sort of unity with God. Okay? Now, the idea behind this, which needs elucidation, which we're not going to be able to clarify entirely, is that how does this, if the Tzimtzum is shelo kipshuto, right, the Tzimtzum is not to be taken literally, then what does that do in terms of how we view the world? That, in a sense, makes the world into an impression in our minds which God created. Because in reality, so to speak, there was no Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is only for those living within this illusion. But once we transcend it, we look back and we say, oh, that felt real, but now we look back and it's not. So let's look at the next source. Okay, the next source. This is quoted from the Sefer of Baal Shem Tov, but in fact this is a quote of the Tzemach Tzedek. Right? Katav, this is from a footnote. Katav Harav HaKadosh Hagon Menachem Mendel Milubavitch, but not the last Lubavitch Rebbe, but the Tzemach Tzedek, also Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who lived from 1789 to 1866. He was the Admor from 1827 until his death in 1866. Okay, so he said as follows, and this is continuing in the, you could say, in the tradition of the Tanya. Okay, Hapgam shel eitz hadat tov ra. He quoted the Baal Shem Tov. What is, you see, they're understanding already that the story of the eitz hadat tov ra is, and the eitz chayim, are different levels of consciousness. Okay? So he says, what is the level of consciousness, the flawed level of consciousness of the eitz hadat tov ra? Amar Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, the Baal Shem Tov said, this is again quoted by the Tzemach Tzedek, Ki ze nikra hitgalut ha'olamot shenir'in nifradim, the revelation of the worlds which appear to be separate. They're not really separate, but they appear to be separate from God. Okay? So this means that when we say that, if we say that the Baal Shem Tov is saying that the, let's say one interpretation of the metaphor of the Baal Shem Tov, of the parable of the Baal Shem Tov, is that the world is somewhat illusory. Right? We're not saying that the world doesn't exist. We're saying that the world is not as it appears to be. Okay? So the eitz hadat tov ra symbolizes the revelation of the worlds which appear to be separate from God. It doesn't mean that there's no world. Just the appearance of that world as being separate from God, a dualistic reality, saying that the Tzimtzum is kipshuto, in other words, right? That is the flaw in the consciousness which is symbolized by the eitz hadat tov ra. V'hargashat hayesh sheha'adam margish b'derech avodah nikra ra shel eitz hadat. Okay, this is an amazing sentence. When we learn Torah, okay, or when we daven, right, when we get a sense that it is we who are davening or we who are learning, there's something in the Piasetzner and the Rebbe, the Eish Kodesh. He says that, he talks about the phenomenology of learning Torah. And he doesn't put it that way, but the feeling that people have when they learn Torah, he says that it's very egocentric. As you say, ich lerne, ich klär, it's my chiddush, I'm learning, I'm thinking. There's a sense of myself as independent of God when I'm learning. Right? That sense, what the Baal Shem Tov is being quoted here as saying, Hagashat hayesh, that sense of being, of substance, shahadam margish b'derech avodah, right? That sense that someone has, nikra ra shel eitz hadat. It's eitz hadat tova ra. That is the ra of the eitz hadat. That sense of being separate, of being an autonomous human being, an autonomous free agent, is the consciousness of the eitz hadat tov ra. Umitchila haya eitz hachayim. Hainu sh'adam harishon lo ra'a rak hachayut shel chai hachiyut ein sof baruch hu. There's something very important that Tzemach Tzedek does, or that the Baal Shem Tov did here. When we, and this is what we ended with last time when we talked about the Tzimtzum. Okay, when the Arizal talked about Tzimtzum, he was describing what is happening with God in relationship to the world. What is happening out there? What happened out there, or what's continuously happening out there. Okay? That's the way it appears in the Arizal. What has happened here, there has been what's called, I think I mentioned this phrase in the past, an interiorization of the Tzimtzum so that it is now understood to be an internal phenomenological occurrence where originally there was the Eitz HaChayim. Adam HaRishon lo ra'a rak chiyut shel chaya chiyut ein sof baruch hu. That is a consciousness of the world before the Tzimtzum. That there was a consciousness of nothing but God, where Adam HaRishon was not aware of himself as being distinct from God. There was no, what is da'at? Da'at here is being read as self-consciousness. At peak moments, we lose self-consciousness, and you're totally in whatever it is. If it's in the simcha that you're in, or if it's in, chas v'chalila, the avelut that you're in. Okay? When you're in it, you lose your sense of self-consciousness. Of course, it intrudes again, because you can only be at a peak moment for a moment. That's why they're called peak moments. Right? But in this model, the reality of the Eitz HaChayim is the reality of living in the world before the Tzimtzum, where there's only God, and I don't perceive anything other than God. I'm not even conscious of myself. Okay? The world of the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara is the world of Hargashat Hayesh, when you experience yourself as being separate from God. Okay? So what was before the Tzimtzum of the Arizal, which is described as something happening out there, right? That's an exterior description. It's a metaphysical description. What's happening in Hassidut, you can call it the modernist turn, where we go from exterior to interior. And now the process is I go from a consciousness of only God and the loss of my own self-consciousness to a withdrawal and where the dichotomy between the subject and the object is introduced. So I have a sense of myself and the other, and myself as an other, because I can look, there's part of me that's myself, and then I contemplate myself in self-consciousness. So I am both a subject and an object. I don't know if I recall correctly. There's a piece in Kant where he makes that distinction. But this awareness is symbolized by the Eitz Hadat. There's a very important point, okay? That there's a movement from exterior to interior. Okay. Now let's see another example of this from the next source. This is from Sefer Pri Haaretz of Menachem Mendel Vitebsk. He was a Talmid of the Magid Mimezrich, that makes him third generation. He came to Eretz Yisrael. He was the first Chassid to come to Eretz Yisrael. He settled in Tveria. And there's a sefer in the 1700s, it's called Sefer Pri Haaretz. He had a Talmid, the name escapes me from now, who got into a very big machloket with the Baal HaTanya over the writing of the Baal HaTanya. They didn't like the fact that anything should be so systematized and presented that way. They viewed Hassidut as something much more spontaneous, and they thought that writing anything down, especially writing it down in a systematic way, which the Tanya does, they thought that it distorted the teachings of Hassidut. And in that sense, the Hassidut of Chabad is really different. A friend of mine said it's sort of a mutation even of more common Hassidut. In any case, so let's take a look at this from this short piece from Menachem from Vitebsk, from Sefer Pri Haaretz. HaChochma shenikra yesh. Okay? The first thing that comes into being is Chochmah. We talked about this when we talked about the emanations of the Sfirot, that the first Sfirah is chokhmah, and its experience is coming out of nowhere. That's why we said, this is, I think it was the second session we talked about this, that we say chokhmah me'ayin timatzeh, that chokhmah comes out of nowhere because we experience the first idea that comes into our minds as if it pops out of nowhere. It doesn't matter that, that we would say it comes from the unconscious and there's a lot bubbling beneath the surface that we're not aware of, but it's experience. This is the point. It's experience of coming out of nowhere. So chokhmah nikra yesh. V'hachiyut shel hachokhmah hami'ira ota nikret ayin. That which provides the energy of that chokhmah, what makes it alive, that is called ayin. Kima amar, ha-chokhmah me'ayin timatzeh. Okay, pshat is, where do you find chokhmah? That's pshat in the pasuk in Eov. But the way they're reading it is, chokhmah comes from ayin. Chokhmah is derived from ayin. Chokhmah me'ayin timatzeh. The chokhmah is derived from ayin. V'ha'ayin, from nothing. Okay, but we'll see the switch that happens here. V'ha'ayin hu ma shechutz min ha'asaga ve'eno musag. The ayin, the nothingness, or the emptiness, is what is beyond human comprehension. Ve'eno musag. It cannot be comprehended. It's not that our minds and hearts aren't powerful enough. In its essence, it is something which cannot be comprehended. V'hu hamichayeh et ha'asaga. But that is what energizes, that is the life force, the mysterious life force that energizes everything. Ume'irota. Okay? Look what he did here. He switched. What is the Yesh? The Yesh is the world after the Tzimtzum. The Ayin is the Ein Sof. Okay? So the real Yesh is Ayin. And the real Ayin is Yesh. He flipped it around. So you can say, in a sense, according to this, that the world was created Ayin from Yesh. The Yesh is the Ein Sof, and the Ayin is, after the Tzimtzum, is what isn't there. Okay? So the Chokhmah is Nikra Yesh. It's not really Yesh. It's only called Yesh. Okay? Now, look what he says. V'hinei, hakol lefi mashu ha'adam b'hasaga im ma'at v'im harbe. So everyone comprehends according to how powerful an instrument they are in comprehension. Hasaga nikra yesh etzlo. Uma shehu chutz mehasagato nikra ein sof hamichaye et hasaga. Okay. What did he do? He did another, this is a great example. He did an interiorization. When the Arizal talks about Yesh and Ayin, when we talk about the Tzimtzum, we talk about the Ein Sof, we're talking about God, right? And he's flipping it in, now he's taking this image and he's absorbing it into himself. And he's saying, whatever you comprehend, that's what we call Yesh. Etzlo. It's subjective. Hasaga nikra Yesh etzlo, according to how much you can conceive. But what is beyond your comprehension, umashehu chutz mehasagato, nikra ein sof. What you can't comprehend, that's the Ein Sof. Hamichayet hasaga. There's something in us that vitalizes us. That's the Ein Sof. And what we do comprehend, that's the Yesh. So our comprehensions come from the Ayin, which is also in us, which animates it all. So here is another example of the interiorization of the idea of Yesh and Ayin. Okay? Okay, let's see now another, we want to try to clarify this some more. So this is a small piece from the Tanya that we have here. Okay, I'm scrolling down a bit. Good. Okay, this is from Shar Yichud Ve'amuna, Perek Gimel. Okay. He says, after I've explained everything here, Ech Shekol Nivra V'Yesh, everything which is created and is, right, which is called Yesh, Hu Be'emet Nechshav, here's the flip, La'ayin Ve'efes, what we call Yesh is considered, we have to weigh these words very carefully, is considered, it's a matter of human perception, נחשב לעין ואפס ממש לגבי כל הפועל ורוח פיו שבנפעל, המהווה אותו תמיד ומוציאו מעין ממש ליש. Okay. What we perceive as yesh, as that which exists, in reality, in comparison to the reality of God, in comparison to the true yesh, is ayin mamash. Okay? So this is saying that, I'm going to go back in a sense to the story of the Baal Shem Tov. Again, here you see it. You see this idea, right? In the Tanya, he says it like philosophically in a sense, whereas in the Baal Shem Tov, it comes out through a story. Okay, so in the story of the Baal Shem Tov, the obstacles, the lions and the tigers and the bears, right? They're not real. They appear very much to be real, but when you compare it to the glory of the king's face and the radiance of the king's face, that reality evaporates. So that's what he's saying here, that the reality, the way we perceive it, shekol nivra v'yesh. He's not saying this is not, I think, what's called acosmism, a belief that the world doesn't in fact exist. Okay? What some people attribute to the Baal Tanya. Okay? He's saying that it's nothing compared לגבי כל הפועל ורוח פיו שבנפעל המהווה אותו תמיד ומוציאו מעין ממש ליש. And God is the one who actively, continuously creates this illusion for us. Okay? Uma shekol nivra v'nif'al, and that which we see, every creation and every object, nir'eh lanu liyesh umamashut, it appears to us as having being, as being ontologically existing. Zeu machmat she'ein anu masigim be'enei basar et koach Hashem v'ruach piv shebanivra. Because our eyes, our senses, only sense a small piece of reality. They sense the physical world. They are not attuned, our physical senses, Einei basar, our physical senses, are not attuned to see koach Hashem v'ruach piv shebanivra. So that's why it seems to us, if we rely only on our physical senses, that there's a world which is separate from God. He's not saying that there's no world. He's just saying that it's not the way it seems. אבל אילו ניתנה רשות לעין לראות ולהשיג את החיות והרוחניות שבכל נברא, right? Then we would see that the world, the way we perceive it, would evaporate, right? ונראה כלל לעינינו כי הוא בטל במציאות ממש לגבי החיות והרוחניות שבו. Okay? It would seem to be non-existent compared to the spiritual reality which is embedded in it or beneath it or enshrouded in it. So what he's saying here is going back to understanding the Tzimtzum, right? The Tzimtzum then, like again, if you read Sefer Bereshit, let's go back to basics and back to Kita Aleph, okay? In a sense, we never leave Kita Aleph because Kita Aleph is what the world seems to us. In Kita Aleph, the story of creation is God creating the world. Okay? There's a world out there which God creates, which is other than God. How he does that, there's some sort of intermediary, which is speech, whatever that is, okay, and however that really works. Okay? What he's saying, in a sense, I'm going to put it in a philosophical term, but I think it'll be clear in this context. If I say that the Tzimtzum is Shelo Kipshuto, right, that in fact, from God's perspective, there was no Tzimtzum, and he's really everywhere, and the fact that we perceive the world as being separate from God, and we perceive our own consciousness, like the world of the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, as being a consciousness which is separate from God, that is an impression that God created in our minds. So that means that all of creation is not something that's happening out there. It's not an exterior event. It is told as an exterior event in the Torah, and they taught it to us as an exterior event in Kita Aleph. But in fact, creation is an epistemic event. It's something that happens in our collective minds, that we perceive the world as being distinct from God. That is a shared illusion that mankind shares most of the time. That is the Tzimtzum. Okay? That is what the Tanya is saying, and that is what emerges from what we saw before from Rabbi Nachman of Litvaks and from the story of from the parable of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay? Now, the question then, and I want to do there's a piece here. It's a little long. I hope we managed to get through it. This is from the Me'ashilach of Mordechai Yosef of Ishbitz, who lived from 1800 to 1854 in Poland. He wrote, his grandson wrote this book called Me'ashilach, which is a collection of what he himself said. Okay. Let's go through this. This is relevant because, first of all, it's Shemitah, so we'll see his parish on Shemitah here. And for him, Shemitah and Yovel symbolize these, in a sense, two different realities. The reality from God's perspective, where there's only God and there's no Tzimtzum, and the human reality, which experiences itself as autonomous. And the significance of that is that there is meaning to Torah and mitzvot, to activities that we do. Okay, and he grapples with this. So let's see this. V'safarta l'cha sheva shabtot shanim, sheva shanim sheva pa'amim, v'shavarta shofar tshuah, v'shavtem ish el achuzato, v'shnat hayovel toshuvu ish el achuzato. Okay, so he's going to talk about Shemitah and Yovel. Inyan Shemitah v'Yovel, hu neged hamidot hanizkarot u'masechet avot. They're parallel, Shemitah and Yovel respectively, are parallel to two attitudes, you could say, which we find in Masechet Avot. Sheli Shelcha and Shelcha Shelcha. Okay? I'm skipping a little bit to where it says Ubishvi'it. It's skipping down 2 lines. Ubishvi'it Yitain Haaretz Lashem Yitbarach Ki hu shovet mimlacha ומעבודת הארץ של רשות על פי רצון השם, וישמור פקודותיו. On Shvi'i, in the 7th year, what do we say? We say, this land belonged to me. God commanded me to give up on the land and give away the fruit and to refrain from doing work. And I do that. I choose to do that because I choose to be shomer pikudotav, to be shomer mitzvot. Ze yikarei sheli shelcha. How is that experienced? What is the phenomenology here? The phenomenology is one of sacrifice, that there's something which was mine. God asked me to give it up, and I give it up. Shali shalcha, and I give it up out of a sense of obedience, obedience to God's command. Hainu, shahadam makneh l'Hashem yitbarach kol kinyano ba'aretz. So he gives to God whatever he owns in the land. But it was mine. I have a sense. Think of what we were talking about before, talk about in terms of like an ego awareness, an awareness of yourself as an autonomous being. That's sheli shelcha. There's an awareness of me. It's mine. It was mine. And I give it to you. Okay? God. That's the phenomenology, the experience of, which is symbolized by the Shemitah years. The Yovel, but Yovel, there everything goes back, right, to the way it was before. Hu neged midat shelcha shelcha. That's parallel to the attitude of what's yours is yours. It's all God's. Shemitzvat hayovel hu sheyashuv, it should be, sheyashuv ish el achuzato. That everyone goes back to their original homestead. V'ish el mishpachto. What does that symbolize? Ki be'emet, in truth, and this is very important, be'emet Elohim asat adam yashar ba'aretz. God made human beings, everything has its proper place. V'chilek nachala lo kol echad ve'echad kefi ma'alato hashayach lo. B'shorsho. Everything has its proper place. V'chein hitziv ish al diglo v'amar lehem avadayhem. Right, so there's this perfect, unchanging, eternal reality, which is what he calls be'emet. That, you could say, on a different level, is before the Tzimtzum. Okay? So God made human beings yashar. Ach machmat shehem bikshu cheshbonot rabim. But they weren't satisfied, and they plotted and they schemed. So some people, because they're more ambitious, they're more industrious, whatever, so they can expand their boundaries, and they can even acquire slaves, right, and subjugate them. And there's someone who is less fortunate, less endowed, so he'll lose what he has, and he has to sell his inheritance. And even in severe cases where they sell themselves. But the word of the Lord is everlasting. Okay? That the word of God is everlasting. So here it is. This is like, I don't know how many of you have little kids. I still have little kids. You have the playroom, right? And all the toys are on the shelves where they're supposed to be. Right? And then the kids come and they mess it up and they make a big balagan. Right? So that's the years of Shemitah, where they're acting and they're making a balagan. And this one gets more and this one gets less and they fight. Right? Until the Yovel. The Yovel is... The Ima is generally the Ima, but if it's the Abba, that's fine. Comes in and says, time to clean up. Everything has to go back to the way it was. So that's the for the Mea Shiloach, that's the primordial reality of the original order as creation would have it. Before the children came in and messed up the playroom. Okay? Achen, kol mishpatei Hashem shiyavu al ha'adam, lo yagia la'omek shorsho. He's doing an interiorization. Now it has to do with how you experience yourselves. There's part of us which remains unchanging, where we can go through whatever we go through life. That's kol mishpatei Hashem shiyavu al ha'adam. Right? All the challenges and the seductions that we encounter and the falls that we fall. Right? Lo yagiu la'omek shorsho. At the end of the day, there's part of me that remains untouched. It's like the waves in the sea. You can have a stormy sea, but underneath the waves, the sea is still the sea. So nothing touches that. The identity remains the same. Ki bara Hashem yitbarach eit lechol davar sheyashuv luch la'achuzato. Because there's a time that everything goes back to the original source. That shnat hayovel bara b'chdei she'az yashuv kol ish al mekomo ba'achuzato hashayach lo me'et Hashem. Okay? So everything goes back. Okay? So we have in a sense, the Tzimtzum, the Ein Sof and the Tzimtzum going back and forth. It's always happening. Right? The Ein Sof, in a sense, doesn't allow for a sense of autonomy. There's only Shelcha Shelcha. But most of the time, we live in the world which is symbolized by Shemitah, where I have a sense of self, and within that sense of self, there is significance to my deciding to obey God's commands. Okay? In the world of the Ein Sof, in the world of Shelcha Shelcha, there's no God's command to obey. It's just being. Okay? It's the Eitz HaChaim. It's not the Eitz HaDat Tov HaRa. Okay? Okay. Hainu, shebishnat hayovel, yitgale or kedushat Hashem yitbarach le'ein kol. Okay, so that means that the light, what is the light? You have to read this now. Since we started with the Arizal, or kedushat Hashem yitbarach is the or of the Ein Sof. That will be revealed, right, in the year of the Shemitah. Okay, he says this is through Ha'avarat Shofar B'Yom HaKippurim, but that would be beyond the scope of this discussion. It's very interesting, but beyond the scope of this discussion to get into how this is connected to the Shofar and Yom HaKippurim. Okay. Then he says, Shema sheyesh lo, hold on. Shema sheyesh lo me'achuzat avotav al yidei nitinat Hashem yitbarach ze yishaer lo. What was given to him, so to speak, what has to do with where they are or where they were put in the original plan of creation, a piece of creation. V'zeh sheba liyado al yidei pulat adam, but that which they acquired through their own initiative, af shehaya kinyano ad ata, even though it was theirs until now, there's a recognition. What does it mean theirs until now? Until the time of the Yovel, in those 49 years which were not Yovel, there is a recognition that it was the person's until now. V'hayad shuto, and it was in their domain. Im kol zot lefi she'eno shelo b'shoresh, but since it's fundamentally not theirs, because it goes against the original plan, yuchrach lachziro l'mkomo hashayach. So we have this very delicate relationship between the world of Shemitah and the world of Yovel, or the world of the Ein Sof and the world of the Tzimtzum. In the world of the Ein Sof, everything is the way it is, and there's no awareness of Shali. Right? In the world of Shemitah, there's Shali. Okay? Now, does that mean the world of Shemitah is a total illusion, that there really is no Ani or Shali? So he says no. Af shahaya kinyano ad ata. It was his until now. He is recognizing a certain amount of ontological significance to this world the way it appears, right? There is, but it's not ultimate, okay? Now, how do I come to this understanding? And that's the revelation of God in the year of the Yovel. Sheyukar l'chol adam makom hashayach l'chol davar. Okay, so people will then have the awareness and achieve a consciousness where they'll see where everything really belongs. Okay. Okay. Then he says, how do you get to this awareness? Here he's more traditional than the Baal Shem Tov, I think. To this understanding, or this consciousness and understanding, yavo acharei sheyikaimu mitzvat shmita, the fulfilling the laws of Shemitah, and here the laws of Shemitah symbolize all the mitzvot, the awareness of myself as an autonomous being who has free will, who can make sacrifices to adhere to the law, right? That's mitzvah Shemitah. Hainu sheyimseru kol l'Hashem yitbarach. They'll give it all over to God. Al yidei zeh yavo l'midat shelcha shelcha. By experiencing shali shelcha, that in Hebrew it's called the tzvita shebalev, right? The little pain in the heart. That's how they'll come to ultimately to a higher level of consciousness where they'll see that it's all God. Okay? Okay. Let's, we're coming towards the end. Let's take a look here to our last source. Okay? What's significant in what we just saw, I just want to stress this, is that there is reality, according to the Mei HaShiloach, there is reality to the world the way we perceive it. It is less than ultimate, but he does recognize it. Okay? He does recognize it as meaningful. Okay? Now let's see the there's a piece here from Rabbi Nachman in Breslov. This is a rather well-known piece. It's called Halal Panui. Okay? And let's give it 5 minutes. Okay? You could give it much more than that, but that's what we have. Okay? This is from the Likutei Maharan. Ki Hashem Yitbarach Machmat Rachmanuto bara et ha'olam. Ki ratza legalot Rachmanuto. Right? He wanted to reveal himself. That's the purpose of the world. It's not about creating the world. It's about creating revelation. Then he says, Al kein barat kol habriya mitchilat ha'atzilut. That's why he created the world. From the first emanation at sof nikudat hamerkaz shel ha'olam hagashmi kedei laharot rachmanoto. Down to the last little physical object. V'kasher ratzah Hashem yitbarach levrot ha'olam. When God wanted to create the world. Here now he's going to say, this is his take on the Tzimtzum. Lo haya makom levor'o. There was no space. Machmat shaya hakol ein sof. Al kain tzimtzem et ha'or l'tzdadim. And that was the Tzimtzum, because everything was ein sof, so he had to limit himself. That's the first thing he had to do. V'ayidei tzimtzum hazeh naseh chalal hapanui. There was an empty space. Ubetoch hachalal hapanui hazeh. And into this empty space, nitavu kol hayamim v'amidot, all the revelation, right, all the aspects of God's personality, shehem briat ha'olam, right, were infused into this empty space. V'zeh hachalal hapanui hayam uchrach lebriat ha'olam. This empty space was a necessary prerequisite to the creation of the world. Ki b'lti hachalal hapanui lo haya shum makom lebriat ha'olam kana. Because without the empty space, there would be no room for the world. V'zeh tzimtzum shel hachalal hapanui. Now listen to this. I efshar lahavinu lahasig ki im la'atid lavo. This is not something, this is beyond human comprehension. La'atid lavo is always atid lavo. Okay? It will never be understood. That's what he means. Ki tzarich lomar lo shnei hafachim yesh v'ayin. It contains an eternal paradox. It has being and non-being simultaneously. Does the halal hapanui exist? Does the world really exist? Or is it all God? The answer is yes. Yesh bo shnei hafachim, yesh v'ayin. Ki halal hapanui hu al yedei tzimtzum. The space is created through God's delimitation. Kiviyachol, now it's not real, so to speak. Kiviyachol. My wife did her master's degree on the term kiviyachol, okay, in Chazal. Kiviyachol tzimtzem elokuto misham. It is as if it appears that God withdrew himself from there. Ve'ein sham elokut kiviyachol, and there's no godliness or there's no divinity there. Ki im lo kain, eino panui. It wouldn't be empty space if God was there. Hakol ein sof, and everything would be the ein sof. Ve'ein makom rebiyat olam klal, and there would be no space for the world. Aval be'emet la'amito, but in ultimate reality, bivadai afal pichein yesham gamken elokut. Nonetheless, God really is there. Ki bivadai ein shum davar biladei chiluyuto. Because there's nothing besides ein od milvado. There's nothing other than God's vitality. Va'al kein efshar lasi klal b'chinat hachalal hapanui. Therefore, it's impossible to understand and comprehend the empty space ad latid lavo, until the end. He here is different, I think, than the Baal Tanya, and I think he's different than the Mea Shiloach. The way the Baal Tanya understands it, and what's implicit in the Mea Shiloach, is that we talk about different levels of reality from an epistemological point of view. In other words, there is a reality, and then there's the way we perceive reality. In a sense, there is no paradox. There's just different levels of consciousness. We perceive things one way. In fact, they're otherwise. There's the way the Rabbi Nachman is understanding it. He is saying that at the same time, both these worlds exist. They are not relative to consciousness. They are both. The world is both Yesh and Ayin simultaneously. The only way to begin to get a handle on this is you have to meditate upon it, and I'll leave that to all of you. Okay. So we finished for today. I'm looking forward to meeting with you next week. Take care. Bye.